We go to hospital, not to knock anybody, but like hospital case management conferences are, they're not really fun. I mean, they're more like work conferences, but conferences around Alca, we do a lot of work with them. The CSA conference is, that's a fun conference. It's just, it's just a hoot and holler. As a matter of fact, not to toot Karen's horn, but as of this year, Karen is also a CSA.
All right. Welcome on board.
Thank
Yay!
you.
Are you going to CSA too, Karen?
I am. So I'll see you there.
Awesome. We're gonna have to get everybody together. I mean, this is just gonna be like what did you just say? A hoot and a holler.
A hoot and holler.
I'm excited. All right, well, I'm gonna introduce you, Bob Bacheler and Karen Dare from Flying Angels. We're so honored to have you with us today. Um, this is such a vital service and such a good resource for us to have in our knowledge base when we're working with our clients and our families, and even just our families and our friends. So I'm going to go ahead and let you get started. Thank you. Thank you for Flying Angels.
Terrific. Karen, do you want to say anything before I jump in?
Sure. So thank you so much for having us join you. I am Bob's business development director of business development. So I have had the pleasure of working. This is my third year with Bob, actually. And I feel so privileged to be in medical escorting side of patient transportation. It's really, really remarkable, and I'm excited for Bob to share a lot more in depth about the um, resources that we have available and what our capacity is with all of our team. And we look forward to answering your questions after the presentation, and just getting into the weeds with you on anything that you're thinking um, that you need to take back to your own clients of importance. So make sure that you ask every question that comes to mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Okay, that's fine. And I always like to start off with just the 10,000-foot view of people who just don't have any idea what we do at Flying Angels. What we do is we have doctors and nurses around the country who accompany people who have medical needs on the regularly scheduled commercial flight. So if you have somebody who is moving, say, from California to be with family in Tennessee, and they're mobility impaired, cognitively impaired, or something like that, how are you going to get them there? Well, you can put them on a private jet. Family can try to take them on a regularly scheduled commercial flight, or you just reach out to us and we'll send a critical care trained registered flight nurse to fly with them. So, what I'm really excited about is over the next 3 hours, I am going to go over all the information you need to know, and we're really going to have a great time. So, without ado, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, am I sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, all right, perfect. Um, so, this is ensuring safe, comfortable patient transportation on commercial airlines. And, that's me. The takeaway here is I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 30 years and I've collected a bunch of letters but, I'm a clinician. At Flying Angels, we have been transporting patients on commercial airlines for over 20 years. As a matter of fact, this particular picture is of one of our nurses 20 years ago flying a 350-pound quadriplegic on a ventilator on a United flight from New York to Denver. Key takeaway from this slide, I feel like I'm preparing people for an exam or something, but the key takeaway from this slide is, people seem to think, well, you can take somebody who's walkie and talkie and, completely functional on an airplane. No, we can take people who have, significant medical needs. As a matter of fact, our specialty is really, spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries, stroke patients, and the like. Uh, Full disclosure here, I'm the owner of the company, so I'm going to say a lot of nice things about what we do. One of the things that we're going to talk about at the very end, when somebody says, "Well, why should we pick Flying Angels over somebody else?" Is I'm going to point to our Google reviews. So I'm going to save that for later. Just a little bit of history. As I mentioned, on the right there, that's me in my Dr. Green days, back in neurotrauma ICU. And I think that was right around 2005. On the left is a time I hope we soon forget. That was during the COVID days. We were flying patients all over the country and all over the world during COVID.
Hmm.
The further that gets away from my memory, the better off we're going to be. A little bit about Flying Angels. We have about 65 nurses and doctors around the US and Canada. Probably going to do about 400 trips a year. 70% of our transports are domestic, 30% are international, obviously. Again, as I mentioned, spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries, kind of specialty of ours. We're transporting people to the centers of excellence, Craig Hospital in Denver, Shepherd Center Atlanta, Shirley Ryan Ability Lab up in Chicago, but we're also just transporting people who have much less significant issues. As I like to say, not every day at work needs to be a hard day. 85% of the patients we transport have significant mobility. People in wheelchairs, people in walkers, people who just can't get around. And post-COVID, about 20% of our patients have cognitive impairments. So we do a lot of dementia cases, where somebody has cognitive impairment and may need some sedation for the flight. We're going to go over just a little bit of overview of what our patient population is. Some of the airline accommodations that are out there, tools of the trade. We'll talk a little about some cases we did, questions, and that. So, who cannot travel on a regularly scheduled commercial flight? And a lot of times, this is more geared towards hospitals. When I'm giving this presentation, when I was a nurse, I would walk into a situation like this at night, patient's room, and I'd be like, okay, just another night at work. But we're not taking ICU level of care patients on a regular scheduled commercial flight. We're going to refer those to some of the terrific air ambulance companies.
I needed the
We're going to talk. I think somebody needs to mute themselves, but who can travel on commercial airlines? We're talking about patients who are physiologically stable. While I was talking about dementia patients, we can't take somebody who's combative. You can't drag somebody kicking and screaming onto an aircraft. They have to be able to tolerate sitting for 15 to 20 minutes for takeoff and landing. And we're going to go into some of the classes later on. Again, I kind of want to stress people think about mobility impairments. As I mentioned earlier, we do spinal cord injury patients. If you just think of a high level spinal cord injury patient, who has no mobility at all, we can still transport. We transport people, who are oxygen dependent. We're going to talk a little bit about stretchers, business class, and first class. Stretcher, I want to kind of get this one out of the way first. This is kind of a misconception. Stretcher on a commercial airline is only available on international carriers. And I realize that, you folks are probably dealing with more domestic than international transports. But people often call and say, hey, I have somebody who needs a stretcher transport, from Los Angeles to New York. And I have to say, no, that's not available. And they say, well, they just put down some seats and put a stretcher on. It's like, well, the international carriers do that, but they're not going to fly from Los Angeles to New York. It's only international flights. And that's kind of what a stretcher looks like. They put down 3 rows of seats and they put a pad on top of it. This is a nicer picture of what it looks like. Again, this was on a Lufthansa flight flying back from Europe. This is just another view of what it looks like. Flying, I think this was flying to Asia on a Korean Airlines flight. But again, one of the things I just want to stress is this is only available on international flights, and it's only available on some airlines. The vast majority of the patients we transport domestically, we're flying domestic first class. I mean, I would probably say, the 70% of patients that I mentioned flying domestically, this is how they're going. They're flying them in a first class seat on a regularly scheduled commercial airline. This is both, for mobility impairments and our cognitive impairment patients. One of the reasons that we fly patients first class is, one, it's for patient comfort. One, it's for our ability of our nurses to care for the patient. You really can't do anything for anybody in an economy seat. I mean, those of us who have flown know, you really can barely open up your own magazine. I fly coach an awful lot. When I fly to Colorado, I'm flying coach. But as a matter of fact, our nurses, when they're flying with a patient, fly first class. When they're flying back home or out, they're in the back of the plane. Also, for our dementia patients, when you transport a patient who has cognitive impairments, it can be a stressful environment. It can be a stressful environment for everybody. A patient tends to get a little agitated. God knows I get a little agitated when I'm flying on a flight, and I do it for a living. But one of the reasons you want to fly them in a first class seat is people who have dementia and cognitive impairments tend to get claustrophobic very, very easily. So if you're flying somebody who, again, whether you're using us or whether you're flying with somebody yourself, who has, any cognitive impairments, what happens is you get down the jet bridge, which can be a little kind of terrifying unto itself. And then you get in the airplane, this long cylindrical metal tube, and you turn right. Well, if you're flying first class, you turn right and you sit down. If you're sitting in row 32, you're walking back in this long tube, and it can really set somebody off who has cognitive impairments. So that's one of the reasons I always tell people if they're going to fly their family, if their elderly relative, a lot of times first class doesn't cost a whole lot more, than regular economy. It really depends on the routes. What I discovered, like here on the East Coast, when you get to that snowbird migratory season, yeah, they're going to jack up the prices of the first class seats. But regular off season, you're maybe $200 more for a first class seat. So I always recommend that. Um, when we're flying people business internationally, I did show you the pictures of the stretcher service, but we usually discourage that. We're going to try to transport people in business class. Most of the time, it is lie flat. This is a particular nice configuration where, the patient sits up for takeoff and landing. And the minute they take off, they can lie flat. You can turn them, you can reposition them. This is a terrific, terrific way to go. I want to talk about some of the tools of the trade that we're using, so we can accommodate the patients who have medical needs, including portable oxygen concentrators, comfort carriers, reclining wheelchairs, and the like. For patients who are oxygen dependent or who have pulmonary problems, one of the things we always want to address is, where is their altitude where they're starting, where are they going to go, and also, how are they going to tolerate a changing cabin pressure? Most aircraft nowadays are pressurized to 6 to 8,000 feet. And what happens is they're going to get there, they're going to get to 6,000 feet pressurization in about 20 minutes from the time they take off. I mean, obviously, the plane's flying at 38,000 feet or so, but the cabin is pressurized to 6,000 feet, 6 to 8,000 feet. And there is less oxygen at that level. So if you have somebody who is kind of marginal or somebody who's oxygen dependent or somebody who just, gets short of breath very, very easily, you may just want to have oxygen available to them, if they need it. And a lot of times it's for comfort. Domestically, I'm going to go back to that whole stretcher thing where I said no domestic airline provides stretcher service. We're going to repeat that, change it up just a little bit. No domestic airline provides oxygen for their patients. As a matter of fact, a lot of the international carriers are getting away from providing oxygen. So if you want to provide oxygen to a patient, you need to bring a battery operated portable oxygen concentrator. And without getting too deep in the weeds, there's really kind of two types of portable oxygen concentrators. One is a pulse mode portable oxygen concentrator, and this works with patients who have nasal cannulas. Basically, the way it works is the machine senses that they're taking an inspiration. It kind of senses that negative pressure, on inspiration, and will deliver a pulse of oxygen, and it'll do that 18 to 20 times a minute. The nice thing about that is you can get 1 to 6 liters per minute, and you get a lot of life out of a battery, 4 to 6, hours of battery. So, if you're figuring you're transporting somebody, coast to coast, you're going to be able to do that with not that many batteries. The other type of portable oxygen concentrator is a continuous flow type. And we use these for our patients who have tracheostomies or, if somebody has a very, very low inspiratory drive. If you think of a 98-year-old, grandma, she just may not have a big inspiratory drive. These are the kind of people we're going to want to prophylactically provide oxygen for. The downside of these is they use a lot more battery power just because, again, they're delivering a continuous flow of oxygen through the whole process. You may get 45 minutes to 2 hours of battery, whereas the pulse mode, you're getting 4 to 6 hours of battery. Again, for our trach patients, we're bringing our continuous flow portable oxygen concentrators. We're bringing suction. A lot of times, people who are trach need to be suctioned on a reasonably regular basis. We're using what on the right, again, getting a little technically and deep in the woods, is what I call an HME. It's a humidified moisture exchange. And it kind of does the job that the upper airway does, where it humidifies the air. And you can put somebody on one of these and it humidifies the air, makes it comfortable for them. In hospitals, a lot of times, if you see somebody connected to oxygen, you're going to see the oxygen going through a little bubble chamber. Yeah, it's not really practical in an airplane because you get knocked over and then you're drowning the patient, which, again, that's just not consistent with what you're trying to do. So we use these HMEs. How do we move our patients who, are completely immobile? And we use a device called a comfort carrier. Again, for the clinicians that I talk to, I say it's like a Hoyer lift, but basically what this is it's a wrap. You wrap around the patient, and it allows you to pick up and carry a patient. Here's a picture of one in action where, it's much easier to move somebody if you have handles on them. So like two people, two relatively strong people. I'd say men, but I've been a nurse for 30 years, and there's a lot of women nurses I know who could kick my ass if they wanted. So I generally say if two people can handle a 200-pound patient, relatively straightforward. So one of the things people don't really give a whole lot of thought to when they're transporting somebody is, let's say you're flying somebody, some from LA to New York. That's going to be a 5-ish hour flight. But how much time are you actually spending on the ground? Well, you have to get the patient, from the facility where they're at to the airport, and that could be an hour. Well, actually, if you're in LA, you could be an hour if you're only 5 miles from the airport. But that could be an hour and a half just getting to the airport. And then you're going to want to get to the airport 2 or 3 hours early. So we're going to want to have, our patients in our reclining wheelchairs. Now we use these for most of our transports. Basically, we can transfer a patient from the bedside to our reclining wheelchair. And then we can just put them in a wheelchair van, wheel them, get them to the airport, wheel them to the airport. And the only time we have to transfer them is when we're actually putting them from the wheelchair into the first class seat. Again, everybody travels on a first class on an airline, is sitting in an airline seat. A year or so ago, people were talking about, well, Delta was talking about putting just you can put wheelchairs in airplanes, and that just hasn't happened yet. So they need to be transferred into a seat. And as I was mentioned here, we have, these are pictures of our patients, in our wheelchair vans, again, making it look like it's a lot of fun. Here you can just take the patient, put them at a 45-degree angle so they're comfortable, load them up and put them in the back of a wheelchair van. Again, as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of spinal cord injury patients. Some of these folks have their own power chairs, and we use our wheelchair vans. Well, I'm sorry, not our wheelchair vans. I mean, we contract out for the ground transportation, but we use wheelchair vans for the ground transportation. Again, this is a little bit more technical and clinical, but one of the questions we get asked a lot from our spinal cord injury hospitals is, well, what do you do with somebody who doesn't have any trunk control, which is very common with your high-level spinal cord injury patients? We have special torso straps that keep people upright in the seat while they're at. Also, one of the big concerns we always have with all of our patients, but again, specifically our spinal cord injury patients, who don't have any sensation in their posterior, you want to make sure you don't have any pressure ulcerization. So, we use gel pads to make sure that we kind of avoid any pressure ulcers. Plus, we turn and reposition them every 30 minutes. So how do we get people from the door of the aircraft to their seat? Well, next time you're at one of the jet bridge, you should see a sign that says aisle chair. And underneath that, hopefully there is an aisle chair. Otherwise, somebody wandered off with this. And basically what this is this device. It's a small chair. And it's actually designed to go back into the aircraft. It can go all the way back into the economy section if you really want, although I've never taken a patient back into the economy section. But basically, you transfer a patient from your wheelchair into this, they strap them up and then wheel them into the plane that way. What happens if you have, if you're at an airport, and again, I know most of the work we're doing here with you guys would be domestic, but what happens? You go to these airports, where they're expected to climb a flight of steps to get to the airplane, and all airports have these special trucks, the scissor trucks, that allow people to kind of wheel into the back, and they bring it right up to the aircraft door. They raise it up, attach to the plane, boom, you just walk right in that way, or you go in with your wheelchair. So I kind of want to put all this together here, and just kind of share some cases that we did and talk about, what happens. And I'm going to talk. The first one we're going to do is a gentleman we took from Canton, Michigan to Zirakpur in India. He was a young gentleman, 35 years old, and he basically had stage 4 colon cancer. And here we are, we've got him loaded up in a reclining wheelchair and in a wheelchair van, taking him to the airport. We had to fly from Detroit to Newark on the first leg of our flight, and here he is. You can tell he's in the comfort carrier, and we're flying in a domestic first class flight. And then in Newark, we wound up flying to Delhi on an international lie flat seat, where we could turn them and reposition them. And then once we got into Delhi, we had about a 5-hour ground ambulance up to Zirakpur. Now, this is actually a ground ambulance in India. Kind of looks more like a party bus, but I had a sofa there. It was kind of nice, and we had our patient here on the right, and loaded him up. And this is, let's see if I can get this right. There we go. This was looking out the window of India. For those who haven't been there, India is a fascinating place. Yes, that is a cow in the middle of the street. And we did this for about 5 hours driving through India. And I swear I can still hear that siren when I go to sleep at night. So actually, it was 10 hours because they wanted to run the siren on the way back from the way back to Delhi. And here we wound up taking the patient to the hospital. And I'd like to include this picture. A lot of people have, dim views of countries outside of the United States. They think every hospital, in the world is dingy if it's not in the United States. This is a hospital that, again, 5 hours north of India, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it's very nice. It's very clean. It was a very nice hospital. We're going to talk about Peter. This is a little bit more local, but still internationally. This was a 64-year-old male who was living in a homeless shelter in Las Vegas and had a stroke. He basically was completely non-ambulatory. We were told in our report that he got out of bed the chair. One of the things we always do is, our nurses always go out and see the patient the day before we travel to answer any questions, to assess the patient, make sure they are exactly as advertised. It turns out this patient who was getting out of bed the chair hadn't been out of his bed in 6 months, so a little bit different. Yeah, but here you go. We're transferring them into our comfort carrier. And this way we can just, move him, put him in our reclining wheelchair. We, using our torso straps to keep him up. This is a site we really love. A lot of times the patients we're transporting who have been in hospital have been there for a really long time. So they really got to get it very nicely. They get connected with staff, and the staff has a fondness for these folks. So, staff always likes to give a good goodbye. Excuse me for a second. And here the nurses are checking in. One of the things I always stress to this is everybody who is going to fly on a commercial airline has to go through the normal ticketing procedures. You're going to have to, you might be able to get your boarding pass online, so you don't have to go to the ticket counter. But everybody has to go through the TSA. Now, every time I try to take a picture of the TSA, they threaten to tase me. So I don't have any good pictures of going through TSA yet. Maybe someday I'll sneak one. And here's a picture of our nurse monitoring our patient sitting in a first class seat on a regular scheduled commercial flight. And here we are. I was talking earlier about the scissor truck. You can see in the background there the stairs that everybody had to get off. And here are our nurses transferring from an aisle chair into our reclining wheelchair. And they got elevated and went straight to the plane. Here they are at their destination. I think the person in the middle, in addition to being a wheelchair pusher, I think she works for security. And here we are handing the patient off to the family. Those are our two nurses, and Karen went along for this one to see what we actually do. So a bunch of frequently asked questions are voiding. What do you do with a patient who is immobile? You're not going to be able to take them to the bathroom. We really prefer Foley catheters for our patients. These are catheters that sit in the bladder and drain urine. For our domestic transports, we can certainly look at diapers as an option. It really depends on how long the transport is. If we have a patient who, is going to be on a 3-hour flight, we can probably just get away with diapers. Bowel movements. You cannot change a patient's diaper on an aircraft. I mean, if you had a stinky diaper on an adult and you tried to change it, people would be having a riot. They'd be trying to open the windows, and that just never goes well at 38,000 feet. So what we'll wind up doing is, we'll do anything from an enema to a full bowel prep to clear out their bowels. Enema can be as, again, simple as an enema, but anybody who's had colonoscopy kind of knows what knows what a full bowel prep is, where they clear you out. One of their questions we get is, can we take a few bags? Well, some people's view of a few bags is different than other people's view. This was a family who said, well, can we send a few bags? Well, that's our nurse with their few bags. So, we try to keep it to carry on only so our nurses can focus on caring for the patients, which is really, really what this is all about. I mean, it's really about caring, for the patient, getting the patients where they need to go. This woman had just lost her husband. What you can't see, is she was holding his ashes in an urn on her lap, and there's our nurse on the other side of the aisle, trying to provide her with some comfort. And let me open the field up to some questions and answers, and we can go from there.
What about emergency evacuation with these patients?
As we do, let's hold on a second. Have I stopped sharing?
No, you still got the
Still
airplane
got the
there.
sharing. Hold on a second. Uh,
It's the big red button.
yeah, I'm looking for the big. There we go. It was a big red button.
See? Reset.
There we go. Yeah, you never know. All right. So anyway, I stopped sharing. So we actually do. I'm going to try not to confuse this. I keep telling Karen, don't confuse the issue, because usually the first question I'm going to get asked is how much does this cost, and we can talk about that as the first question. Insurance does not pay for this, which is usually the second question. That said, One of the things I always encourage people to do is if you're traveling overseas, buy a good medical travel insurance policy. I'm not talking about trip insurance. I'm talking about a medical repatriation policy. You can buy them either on a case by case basis. They may cost $40 for a trip, or there are some companies like GeoBlue, not necessarily endorsing anybody, who offer annual policies, which is what what I have and our team have, where it's just for $200 a year. It'll pay for your medical expenses when you're overseas, and it'll pay to bring you back to the US. We do some work with those companies, so they can call us up and say, hey, we have a woman who had a stroke while in Florence, Italy, say, just picking places at random, and needs to be brought back to Las Vegas,
So,
and
so
we'll take care of the arrangements and get her back.
so do the
Uh,
standard carriers offer this, or is this a specialty insurance that you have to go through a special carrier?
it depends. Some people when they book trips, the people who do that will offer it. Some people's insurance, that they carry, will offer riders for medical travel insurance, or medical repatriation insurance. Or you can go and just Google medical travel insurance, and there are companies that just specialize in just providing medical travel insurance. It's just one of those your mileage may vary. It kind of depends. Some of the questions are, is the person, on private insurance or are they over 65? That'll have impact, what pre-existing conditions they have, because you most likely will get asked, if you have a pre-existing condition, and you really have to be upfront with them, because if you have an exacerbation of a pre-existing condition and you didn't tell them about it, your claim may get denied. So, you know, if you are doing bungee jumping and break your leg, well, there's probably not a whole lot of pre-existing conditions, but if you have a pulmonary problem and are overseas and have pulmonary exacerbation, your condition gets worse, that might be a different story. So,
Avery.
Avery, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. I was really looking forward to this presentation. It's fascinating. I actually fly quite often internationally myself. And the last time I went abroad, I got ill and had to come back in a wheelchair, and that was really eye-opening. Luckily, it didn't get to the extent where we made a claim and did medical repatriation. Um, but I know you can't endorse anyone, but do you find that some carriers and some insurance companies are typically easier to work with from an efficiency standpoint?
it on a case by case basis. I mean, again, not an endorsement. I use GeoBlue for my travel insurance. Again, their top tier policy I think is $200 a year. And that'll cover me. As a matter of fact, I just renewed our policy for my wife and I policy. We're going to Berlin to visit my daughter. And I just renewed our policy in the event that something happens. When you're young, in your 60s like me, really young, you're more concerned about getting into a car accident. Fact here that the number one cause of injury and or death for travelers overseas, even in conflict zones, motor vehicle accidents, absolutely number one by far. And anybody who's been overseas, maybe in a taxi in Rome, you're like, how am I getting out of here without getting killed? But driving is interesting in other places in the world. So,
So getting back to
Thank
the
you.
emergency evacuation question.
well, we're not really geared towards emergency evacuations. If somebody, had a stroke, they would be stabilized in the country where they are. Or again, if you had medical travel insurance, they would evacuate you to a place close by. Like if you're in Southeast Asia, most likely, if you had medical travel insurance and needed to be emergently evac, the travel insurance company would probably arrange for an air ambulance type vehicle to get you to, say, Bangkok, where they have some terrific hospitals there. And then from there, they would reach out to a company like us once the person was stabilized to bring them back. Same thing in the Middle East. They'd probably wind up, bringing you in, bringing somebody into Dubai, Africa. They're a lot of times they're going to transport somebody emergently by air ambulance down to Johannesburg, South Africa, and then that's where we get the call that hey, we had a patient, who was on safari in Botswana and, you know, got hit by a car or something,
Well,
and
that's not exactly what I'm referring to.
oh, I'm sorry.
On commercial airlines, it's a requirement that you have to evacuate the airplane in case of an emergency landing or something in
Okay.
a minute and a half. And that's why they have so many emergency exits on the larger planes. But
Okay.
people have to be ambulatory to get to the emergency exits. So that's why I was wondering, some of your patients would probably not qualify for that, and I'm wondering what they do in that case.
It's funny. That is an incredibly terrific question, and it is the first time anybody's ever asked that. So, what we do when we're flying internationally, and this is kind of mandated, is we actually send a letter saying that our nurses are able to evacuate the patient from the aircraft in the event of emergency. Um, and that is why we're, one of the reasons that you would send, a nurse or two. If we have somebody who's 250 pounds, we're most likely sending two nurses for that exact reason. In the event that we need to evacuate the aircraft, our nurses are not just going to get up and leave the patient. They are going to evacuate that patient with them. So, yes, in order to fly internationally, the patient and or the people who are traveling with the patient have to certify that they are capable of evacuating that patient in the event of emergency.
And the
Sorry,
airlines are okay with that.
yeah,
Wow.
the airlines are okay with that.
Okay.
Now, what's interesting is again, there's a little difference between international carriers and domestic carriers. Domestic carriers are much more laid back about that. They don't specify that question. With the international carriers, if you have somebody who has any kind of medical needs, let's just say they need a wheel, they need assistance from the door of the aircraft to their seat. Here in the U.S., there's no question about that. Internationally, on international carriers, you have to fill out a medical, I bet they call it MEDIF. It's a medical clearance form stating this patient is fit to travel on a commercial airline. And that's one of the reasons that they're asking that question is, can that patient be evacuated from the plane safely in the event that there is an emergency? And that's what the nurses are there to do. So yes, to your point, as long as the nurses are able to evacuate the patient, um, we're fine.
Okay. Micklin?
We have a, yeah, we have a, yeah, Nicholas.
I just want to go back to the expense part of it.
There
And
we
you said
go.
they have to have their own insurance. But somebody like the gentleman you just showed who was homeless,
Hmm.
how would he, and with two nurses and or one nurse or whatever that was, and then the flight
Hmm.
and the
Hospital.
fare?
The hospital pays for it. Um, that actually probably in the vast majority of repatriations that we do, foreign nationals, where we're taking somebody, next week we're transporting a patient to China for a local hospital, and the local hospital is paying us to get them back home because it is far, far less expensive to contract with us and take the patient home than it is to have that patient, languishing in a bed who doesn't have any insurance. Now, if you have somebody who is a U.S. citizen in the hospital bed, well, they're going to get paid by somebody, probably the government. But if you have a foreign national, I, example is the patient we took to St. Lucia. He was not a U.S. citizen, so there was no money coming into the hospital for his care. And he was there for months and months and months. So, once they found that the family in St. Lucia was willing to take him, they reached out to us. We set everything up, and the hospital paid us directly to repatriate them. And I would probably say most of the foreign repatriations we do, and we do them all over the world, Africa, Asia, Europe, Central South America, are paid by the hospital to get them off their books.
So you're saying the patients do not pay for a an aide to travel with them. It's being done whoever pays for your services.
Well, so domestically, the vast majority of our transports are private pay, where the family or the patient is paying. And just in broad stroke numbers, for us to transport somebody domestically within the U.S., it's going to cost, $9,000 to $10,000 soup to nuts, flight, nurse, ground, the whole 9 yards. If I'm sending one nurse, if I'm sending two nurses, probably $15,000, anywhere in the U.S. It doesn't really matter where, it's not really distance constrained. Whether I'm flying them from, Florida up to New York, or whether I'm flying them from New York to Los Angeles, or anywhere in between. And that's everything. And 9 times out of 10, that's being paid by the patient and or the family. It's those odd cases where you have a foreign national who is in a hospital here in the U.S., where the hospital will pay for it and or chip in. If the family has some money, obviously the hospital doesn't want to pay more than they have to. But the hospital will chip in or pay for the whole thing.
Well, the most important question, who gets the frequent flyer miles?
That's what our nurses say. Our nurses get the frequent flyer miles. And
Uh,
and the patient can get his frequent flyer miles too. Although to be fair, I'm not sure how many times, our patient's going to be flying again. But nope, our nurses get their hotel points, they get their frequent flyer miles. They that's one of the perks of the job. Years ago, I was quoted in an article and they said, "So do you get your frequent flyer miles?" I said, "Yeah." So what are the perks of flying all the time? Well, I get to fly more, and or my kids fly. My kids use a lot of my frequent flyer miles. Growing up, they would love that. They thought it was great. Hey, Dad, can I fly here? Yeah. Do you have enough miles? Yeah, I have enough miles. Book a ticket for my kids on miles.
did you ever get those little plastic wings to put on you?
I I actually have a pair of Eastern Airline wings.
Ooh,
From
that'll
yeah
be,
when
we'll
they're
sell that on eBay for a
I'm
bunch.
I'm gonna date myself there. Yeah,
There you go.
Northwestern, Eastern, GWA. Yeah, I collected those for a while.
All the,
Tell them what you used to do, Skip.
oh, I used to work at a winery.
Okay.
No, not that
Oh,
one.
no, not that one. Oh, he knows when we did the
I
CSA
know, but just in case,
conference. Yeah, I'm an airline pilot, retired.
Oh, okay.
So I flew for, well, I got hired by Flying Tigers when we got bought out by FedEx. So I flew international with all the heavy iron, and I had to medically retire in '05, about 10 years before my normal retirement. So now I need to use your services to get around.
You're flying the big DC-10s,
No, we had
no?
MD-11s.
MD-11s.
Yeah, I started out on the mini jet, the DC-8,
Okay.
and then went up to the 747, and then at FedEx it was the MD-11.
Well, Skip, I think that you and Bob should have a private conversation
No, we
together.
could.
And yeah, because Bob is a huge aviation enthusiast. So you guys could have some great
I'm a
conversation.
complete geek when it comes to airplanes.
Well, I
One of,
got stories
one of the
and
things I
flying.
wanted to add to the presentation is that we wanted to make sure you all know that we're here as a resource for you. Everyone in our company is a critical care trained flight nurse, including all of our flight coordinators. So if you call in with any questions, they're going to be able to answer those questions immediately. They're not going to have to run them up the chain to have somebody review medical records and things of that nature. So if you have questions about a potential client that you think a family wants to navigate travel from where they are to where your particular office is located, I don't know if you work in territories or things of that nature. But if you do, if you have families that are talking to you about wanting to relocate their loved ones closer to where you are, please feel free to reach out to us because we'd be happy to provide you with some information to help make that move possible. So keep that in mind. Everyone in the company, myself excluded, everyone else is a critical care trained flight nurse. And also, Bob did say this, but I want to make sure that I really also hit this home for you. We do every bit of the heavy lifting when it comes to all things transportation. Once we start working with you or your client, we take the lead on everything because we're coordinating the flights, the ground transportation, strategically preparing and managing, logistically oversighting the entire transportation process. So keeping you in the loop every step of the way. But when it comes to transportation and coordinating it, we hear this a lot from healthcare professionals. It is so overwhelming because they don't do it with regularity. But our team, Bob has really built an incredible team, and they're definitely what I would call subject matter experts in the area of transportation. And the other thing, too, is if your client is acute enough and not stable for commercial, if they have a higher level of acuity requiring ICU level of care, we have the resources to recommend on the air ambulance front as well. So keep that in mind. We have lots of colleagues in the industry in air ambulance with travel companionship, and of course with us as medical escorting on commercial flights. We can certainly be a resource for you to kind of bounce things off of. So yeah,
you have to be cute. You
have to be
cute.
what?
You have to be cute. You said, yeah. Oh, acute.
No.
Okay, all right.
That lets
No.
you out.
Not
And just,
cute.
just as a reminder for you folks, we did a session on aerial ambulance. So if you go in the archives, you can review that. And these two companies are working in parallel, to accommodate the whole range of the patient that
I
needs
love that.
transporting.
Who
Avery.
did you have, Skip, that
Oh
came
God,
on
I'd
and
have to
talked
look
about
it
air
up.
ambulance?
I can't even remember now. It's been a while.
It's AirMed something. AirMed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's AirMed
Yeah.
International. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
them.
AirMed.
Yeah. Really nice people. Really
Yeah,
nice people.
they're terrific.
Yeah.
Avery?
Avery, I'm sorry to interrupt. Avery, you had another question?
Yeah, thank you. So if a family member or family members want to travel with, do you
Mhm.
handle the ticket
Yes.
booking of that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
We will. I mean, and of course that would help that would mean the quote would fluctuate in pricing, obviously, because we're booking the tickets for the family. They may not be able to sit in first class because, we're, definitely going to have our nurse and the patient sit in first class, but we will definitely be happy to manage all of that. In fact, I think Bob would agree. We appreciate the opportunity when we know that family is going to travel to be able to do that and keep everybody together. And, so it is wonderful to have that support.
Let me jump in there because to
Yeah.
answer yes, we actually prefer to book everybody's tickets and obviously we actually encourage it. I would probably say on about 1/3 of our transports, there's family member there, and 2/3 is just our nurse and the patient. But if family wants to go, we're absolutely happy to have them. As long as there's seats on the airplane, the only additional cost is the cost for that ticket. Again, as Karen mentioned, if there's first class seats available and they want to fly in first class, great. If they want to fly in coach, well, again, that's up to them, but we'll book them wherever they want. The key reason we want to book their tickets though is, we have an in-house travel agency. We do everything in-house. And, as anybody who's traveled knows, changes can happen. And we've had diversions, we've had reroutes, we've had, storm delays. anything that can happen. If we purchase the tickets, we can keep everybody together, and make any changes. If a family member wants to go out and well just buy it on Travelocity, okay, well if there's a problem and we need to change something, we can't change a ticket that was purchased elsewhere. So we had this years ago, and we changed tickets for a nurse and a patient, and they had to go, and the family member was stuck, and it was like, well, we'd love to help if we could, but we just couldn't. So, while we don't say we absolutely have to book family members' tickets, we strongly want to for that exact reason. And we're going to be very transparent. If we don't book your ticket and something changes, we can't do anything about it. It's not that we don't want to. It's just, we can't make changes to a ticket we didn't purchase.
If you're doing a transport for a family member, that a family is like transporting, okay, like my mom. If I want to bring my mom from Illinois to out here to California,
Mhm.
she's not in the hospital or anything, but she's in senior living, and
Mhm.
she does need to be moved around in a wheelchair. Does and she's cognitive. She
Mhm.
just needs to be escorted. Does it
Mhm.
have to be first class in that case?
Yes, we own, I mean, again, there's nothing you can do with a patient and coach. Plus, you're going to have a third person sitting next to them, which is kind of unfair. But the biggest issue is, if we have a problem with a patient, you don't have enough room to move or do anything. So yes, we're going to fly all of our patients in first class. Now, it's like everything else. There's always an exception. If we have somebody who's in a leg immobilizer, say, let's say they can't bend their knee, then we may just get them a full row of seats in economy rather than a first class seat. So that would be one of the exceptions, to the rule. But if we're transporting them, they're flying in first class. And again, it's domestically, it's usually not that much more. So, when I'm presenting on, just what resources are there for people to move people, I was like, take a look and see. It might be 150, $200 more for first class, and that's money well spent for transporting somebody.
Yeah, and you probably have a pretty good way, since you're your own travel agency, you book your own tickets,
Hmm.
you probably have a really good system in place to get the
Hmm.
most cost-effective first class rates when you call and ask
Yes,
for a ticket.
yes, we do. Yeah,
Right.
there's no middlemen involved. We're doing it all, completely internally.
So really quick, Clay just noted that Geo Blue changed their name to Blue Cross Blue Shield Global Solutions.
Oh, yes, I'm
And
sorry.
and in the message board, you can see the link that he was so kind to actually post. So feel free to snag that and open it up and take a look at it if you have need for international travel insurance.
So when people are booking an international flight and the subject of insurance, travel insurance, flight insurance, it comes up, is this a product that's offered in that conversation?
I mean, not when we're transporting somebody.
No, but I
Um,
mean just us
it
consumers.
it just as a consumer, if you're booking your own trip, it's something you just need to be aware of. If you're booking a tour group, they're probably going to mention that,
Mm-hmm.
and or, if you're booking a package, they're probably going to have a package, for you. My mom does a lot of cruising, and,
Yeah.
as part of the cruise package, there is a medical travel insurance. Now, again, just to be clear, there's two types of insurance. One is trip insurance, and what trip insurance is going to do is that's going to wind up paying for your ticket, if something happens. If a flight gets canceled and or, part of your trip is interrupted, the trip insurance will pay for your ticket. That will not pay to get you back home. I mean, that's what the medical travel insurance is if something happens to you while on a trip. So there's two different types of insurance that you want to purchase when you're flying internationally. Again, this is not this is just international flights. I mean, it really doesn't apply domestically.
I just had a thought. What happens if the plane's booked and you don't have seats available to travel on it?
No, again, if, this is an issue that comes up, when people want to fly, on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and everything's sold out. That's one of our limitations, that there have to be seats available on a flight for us to go. We have nurses available all the time. There have been cases, especially with our insurance clients, where they'll say, well, how fast can you go? And it's like, well, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, getting somebody out of Europe. I can have a nurse on a plane at 5 o'clock in the evening getting out to Europe, and we can bring them back, the day after, as long as there's seats available on the aircraft. That's usually the limiting factor. And again, that's seasonal. People want to fly from, Sarasota up to New York, in May. Well, that's the snowbird migratory season. Tickets, flights can be sold out. So that's a limitation we face.
Let me give you one more a little bit of food for thought let's go back to the travel insurance. Make sure you read the fine print. Make sure you advise your clients to read the fine print on the international travel insurance policies. There's two things that could happen. They could be repatriated back to the nearest port of call in the US. So if they're in Europe, they'll go to New York. And if they live in California, then they have to find their own means of transportation from New York to California. But you can also find travel insurance that actually takes you back to your home, your city. So you want to make sure that clearly you share that with your clients, or for yourself if you travel. That's really important. And a lot of people don't stop to think about that. They just get travel insurance without the thought of they're in the Bahamas and they're going to end up coming into Broward County in Florida, or they're in South America and they're going to come into Houston, Texas, or they're in Hawaii or that part of the country and they're going to come back to California or the eastern or the western seaboard. So just keep that in mind because they still have to find their way back home unless they get a travel insurance policy that actually will bring them home. Any other question?
Question. I want to distinctly difference. This is not, you're talking about travel insurance, but the example you gave of the young man with the cancer. How long had that's not part of travel insurance, or that's part of medical care insurance. How long had he been in that condition?
Julie, you're going to have to repeat it. We can't hear him.
So the question was my Indian case, the fellow who had cancer who was flying back home to India. That's not something insurance is going to pay for. If you have a terminal diagnosis and you want to die at home, that's just something that you need to pay for. Now, we actually have very close connections with the Indian diaspora here in the US. So we're routinely flying people back.
Would you qualify for long-term care insurance at that point?
Long-term, we have had situations where long-term care insurance, will pay for it. And there are also cases where people, are I don't say they're using our service, but, as part of the Medicare spend down requirements, because we're considered a legitimate expense, to get somebody where they need to go. So, I mean, two or three over the years in long-term care insurance, they've paid for us, but just general medical insurance is not going to pay for our services.
And not all long-term care insurance will pay. You have to get one with a rider that does.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of few and far between.
That's an important piece of this because it's like people make the mistake all the time. Like we have this much to spend down and they'll gift it to somebody. And like, no, you can't, there's specific things that you can do. You actually have to spend it. So if that was kind of like this is like, we got to do this or that, because that's what it's coming down to for a lot of families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually more common, than anything else. Again, I know we got into the weeds on the whole travel insurance,
This particular problem had been
but the vast majority of the transports we do are private pay. I mean, 95%.
And for some families, it's like this is our only shot to get this person here in our own
Mhm.
community. Back
Mhm.
to yeah.
For some people, that $10,000 number I quoted is absolutely nothing. And for other families, that $10,000 number is a GoFundMe page and
Mm,
trying to get money from friends and relatives.
mm.
And they're, hey, they are scraping every single dime and dollar to get that. Not all of, again, it's one of these, if you have somebody who has medical conditions and can't fly by themselves and really need our services. I always, say, people say, well, it'd be nice to have a nurse. Well, they're probably not going to use our services when I say it's going to cost $10,000, but when I tell somebody it's going to cost $10,000 and they're like, well, is that all? Then I figured they were probably talking to an air ambulance company that quoted them $50,000. Well,
Yeah.
$10,000 is a lot of money. But if you sit there and quote, compare that to $50,000, all of a sudden that sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
I remember there was a couple. I used to work for former FBI agents, and there was a couple, a man and three other white husband, wife, and three kids, and they're trapped in South America. They lived in my city, and
Mhm.
I found out about him. He was just, I'm stuck here. I can't go anyplace. And I was like, well, I'll make a phone call. So, I made a phone call and was like, call this number in 15 minutes, but have like 30 grand. Like you have to, like, that's it. Like you got to 30 grand. And like, he didn't want to get his family of five out of there. And he's like, he waited. I was like, but that would have, like at that time, I thought that was a
Mhm.
steal. Just to have
Yeah.
accessibility, that's the other piece too. It's not just the price. It's like the coordination of I got to get this person here.
Mhm.
And to a family, like if we don't do this, then they're going to be spending the end of their days someplace else, you know?
Avery, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Um, I know you mentioned that you have nurses available all the time, but what would you
Mhm.
recommend would be the minimum, ideally, amount of time that someone contacts you to start arranging this?
Oh, terrific, terrific question. So we're flying on commercial airlines. We're buying, again, we have our own travel agency, but we're still buying the tickets from the airline. And just as everybody else, if you're buying a ticket further in advance, it's probably going to cost you less than if we're buying that, last minute ticket on the flight out the day before. So the majority of our cases, 5 to 7 days, is probably what they go on. Sometimes it might be a week or two, but that's more of an outlier. One week is generally the sweet spot, to find availability. But the more time we have a couple cases on the books that are there for a month because they just buy a ticket a month out, and it's going to be less than trying to buy it 24 hours out. But in many cases, that price is not the deciding factor. It's okay, mom needs to get out of here. Okay, we found a bed in a rehab facility in another state, and they're only going to hold that bed for 48 hours, so we need to move quickly. These are the scenarios, that we get, where we're going to move quickly. But Avery, to answer your question, 5 to 7 days is probably the sweet spot for us. Somebody
Thank
says,
you.
"Hey, I want to move as soon as possible," and I'm thinking, "Okay, tomorrow." They're like, "Oh, we're thinking next month."
Well, and doesn't that, it helps with logistics, this timing, right? So if you have more time, but not too much time.
That it's funny is I actually we like the fast moving ones because they're just boom boom boom, okay, let's go. And we have this down to a science, obviously doing hundreds and hundreds a year. So there's no dawdling when you have a fast moving case. You're one day you're talking, next day nurses in the air, day after that they're flying with the patient. So they're our favorites. And not
Any other
everybody,
questions?
not
Oh,
everybody has to be difficult. I mean, we do
yeah.
fit, we do a lot of, grandma has just a touch of dementia, and the family want to fly her from Florida to New York or, wherever it may be, and the family's scattered all over the country. So she doesn't need a whole lot
Yeah.
of care. but rather than family taking time off of work, and flying down there and then flying, with their mom, and then, it's just easier to reach out to us and say, hey, my mom's here. I want her there. Go do it.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because when we work with families that are relocating and perhaps have been split and then now they're developing a multi-generational household
Yeah.
and need to be brought back together in some form, this is going to be a really good resource for that. Because we talk to a lot of people and they're like, I don't know, what am I going to do with my mother or my dad? And how am I going to go get them, or all of that. So this is a great resource. Yeah,
Well,
at
and
any
Call
Julie,
us
price.
and we'll get them there.
yeah.
Okay. Easy
And
peasy.
and Julie, you all have worked with families long enough that you know also that for families whose loved ones are suffering from any form of dementia, they feel comfortable up to a point traveling with them, and then the progress becomes um, makes it to where they are no longer comfortable traveling because they don't know how to manage it. But I have said to Bob before, I think that, Bob included, many of our clinicians are dementia whisperers. They just really know how to bring that temperature down, keep the patient occupied, because you can only um, imagine we're also having to consider the expectations of the other passengers on that flight. Now, our clinical team are really, really excellent about putting the dignity of the client, the patient, first and foremost, alongside, of course, their medical care. But they do everything in their power to maintain that level of dignity for the patient, not make such an issue out of it that people become concerned around them. But they're still, having to manage the expectations of others on the flight is very important to us. So it's pretty remarkable to watch our clinical team in action with any patient. But the few times that I've been able to observe them in action with dementia patients has been pretty extraordinary. So you can rest assured, we definitely do that well.
That's amazing. Avery, go ahead.
Avery,
I'm sorry if it feels like I'm hogging the mic.
no,
You mentioned that you have resources and partners who do the different tiers
yes,
of care
yes.
if it's not at the level where you would provide it. A question that sometimes comes up is when someone wants to go on vacation or do a kind of
Mhm.
bucket list trip. And so obviously you wouldn't be providing 2 weeks or a week of being
No.
with that person. What do you usually recommend a specific provider?
Yes, yes, we would definitely do that for you. So one of the beautiful things is, and you will all appreciate this, when your reputation's on the line, vetting those other resources is really critical. You want to make sure that you are vetting colleagues, and there are a lot of colleagues in the whole patient transportation arena. So you want to make sure that you are truly recommending colleagues that do travel companionship or air ambulance companies or ground transportation companies that that excuse me that you know are going to do their work with the same level of excellence that Bob and I and the team do. So yes, that's very important to us. So yes, we do have those resources and we're happy to make recommendations if you have patients that need companionship more than just a medical escort getting them from point A to point B. And if they're going on vacation and the family can manage them, we can do the trip. We'll do it, but we're not going to be able to stay. But if they need that ongoing level of care during the vacation, we definitely have resources that we can recommend. That's a great question. So thank you for asking that.
And
Yeah.
Thank
as a
you.
dovetail to that, one of the reasons people ask why don't we do that, and all of our staff are flight nurses and doctors, and licenses are by state. So while we can have a nurse who's licensed in Colorado go to Florida and fly a patient to New York, we're covered as long as we're in transport. But who are picking up care from a facility or a residence in Florida and going to New York. The problem is if the nurse starts staying with the patient in New York and providing nursing care in New York, they're providing care outside of their state of licensure. And that's a no-no for both doctors and nurses. You have to make sure that you're providing care in your state of licensure. So that's why we do the point to point, because we're covered as long as it's a distinct trip from point A to point B. So maybe an aide or a CNA or a non-licensed person can just be that travel companion on a trip or go with them on a vacation.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Do you have any other questions? Skip just sent us a little thank you with some fantastic photos attached. Thank you, Skip. I'm just responding to you.
I'm just trying to get the juices flowing at least for Bob.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's going to be incredible. Those are amazing planes. Absolutely amazing.
Yep.
Well, we are a resource for you. So, Julie, you have my email address. You have Bob's and my personal contact information, but also our flight coordination number. If you need anything, let me know. I'm happy to respond in an email. I'm happy to, if I haven't already done this, I think that I did for some of you, attach the electronic copy of our brochure, our global map that breaks our pricing out. We're very transparent about that. But also our process flow. I'd be happy to send you that email, Julie, and you can or maybe what I'll do is just respond to, oh, I don't think everybody's on Skip's email. So I'll send it to you, Julie. And if you don't mind pushing it out, that would be great.
Oh, yeah,
do we have-
definitely. Thank you.
Do we have their contact information on
I'm
one
going
of
to
the
strangle
slides?
you in a minute.
Well, he
You'll
might
have-
need
Really?
might need some
Really?
medical travel after that.
Yeah, really,
Yeah, you are.
for sure.
Skip, you'll have
Give me that. Give me that.
you'll
Are
have
you
everything.
freaking kidding me?
What's
Skip.
that
Well,
thing?
and you'll
Oh.
and
You
if
did that.
Julie and if Julie pushes my email out to all of you with the attachments, you'll have my signature block has all my personal contact and corporate contact information. So feel free to reach out. We're happy to be a resource for you anytime, or any one of your colleagues, feel free to push the information forward to them. Yeah, we're here for you. So thank you. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you some of you at the CSA conference coming up.
Yes, this is going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to that.
It's
I
like
envy
2
you
weeks.
guys.
It's like 2 weeks from
Yeah,
now,
and
right?
3 weeks. So, well, thank you so much for your presentation today and your participation. We're really happy to have you in our cache of resources now. There's going to be
welcome.
so many ideas that we're going to be able to utilize in our conversations with our clients and our friends and our families.
Absolutely.
So we really appreciate it. Thank you
Well,
so
we
much.
appreciate
You guys
you.
have a
Thank
great
you.
week. We're just gonna real quickly mention we're having Amin Khan next week from AARP is gonna talk about romance scams.
Oh.
Wait, are you
Yeah.
saying those hot girls don't really want to meet me?
If somebody comes up to you and says,
Not you, Bob, other people.
Do you
Oh
need a
my
housekeeper?
Let
I have
let
a
me
client. Their dad in Las Vegas got a housekeeper off the bulletin board at the laundromat. And then over time, she took him for every single dime. Yeah.
let me throw in here just to dovetail on that. We get calls every so often from somebody who says, "Hey, I need to fly my girlfriend in from Romania," and I'm like, hey, are you? I mean, let's double check that. I suspect you may not. This may not be what you think it is.
Just so that's going to be exciting next week. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate everybody's participation. Yes, everything will be in the bulletin next week. And as always. So, all right, everybody. Thank you. Have a good week.
I had
All
questions
right.
for you,
Thank
Julie,
you.
about the
Oh,
tours.
Michelin. I'm sorry,
Yes.
Michelin. Go
You
ahead,
want to
hon.
take it offline? The tours, because I
Oh,
have,
yeah.
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 You want me to call you?
Yeah, we'll talk about it later this afternoon.
Okay,
Okay, hon. Thank you.
All
thank you.
right.
Okay,
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great
Love you
presentation. Thank you.
all.